NX Join has a new capability for managing attached hardware, such as nut plates or gang channels. I'm going to demonstrate this on a simple assembly. What we have here is a blue panel that's sitting on top of a skin. Now this is a removable panel. A technician may need to be able to take that out in order to get access to what's underneath. In that type of application, the technician would not have access to the back side to be able to hold a typical nut or collar in place. So this is a good place to use nut plates. You'll notice if I hide the panel, you can see that the skin is recessed where that's going to sit to allow us a nice smooth surface. And we have some points already laid out that would be the locations where we would want to put some bolts through to attach that panel to the skin. We'll begin the workflow by first defining the nut plate itself. So we start first by choosing the points where we want to apply the nut plates. Now in this case, we don't actually want the nut plates to be on the face where the points are. So what I can do is then select the back side as the attachment face for them. Next, I choose the preferred hardware. I have several examples of different styles of nut plates and gang channels here, but what I'm going to choose is a standard 2-lug nut plate. Next, I choose a curve to basically line the lugs of the nut plate up. Basically what we'll do is we'll take the point, we'll take the tangent direction from the curve, and that's going to be the orientation for the nut plates when they're brought in. So if we now spin the part around to the back side, you can see now that the nut plates have been loaded and placed on the underside of the part. You'll notice that in addition to loading these nut plates, we also have some additional points that were created. This was done automatically when the nut plates were loaded. Basically, our database has some information that tells us how far, relative to that center location, where are the rivets going to be that attach this nut plate to the skin. If we take a look at the feature here, you can see on each of these we have these rivet points that have been added. That would indicate where the nut plates are attached. So now, let's define the rivets that will be used to hold these nut plates in place. We have a new subtype that we've introduced in the point join command for the nut plate rivet. One unique thing about this particular subtype is when I go to select my connected parts, I only select one. Our focus immediately goes to choosing the points because we don't have to worry about multiple parts that we're attaching here. We're simply trying to attach the nut plates permanently to one part. Next, when I specify the points, I can go ahead and do a trap select. And we intelligently recognize that some of the points that may have been captured here were actually used to define the nut plate, so we can filter those out. All we really want is the rivet location. So you can see I've got the 16 rivet locations and we've ignored those center points. I can define my hardware. I've got a specification for a nut plate rivet. And it's sized basically taking into account the thickness of the skin at this location plus the thickness of the lugs of the nut plate. And that's how we end up with the -7 rivet. Go ahead and create holes for these. And one thing we'll do here is we'll add a small subflush so that when the panel comes back in, you don't have to worry about the fastener protruding in any way, so that the panel can sit flat on top of the surface of the skin. As you can see here now, we've got the nut plate rivets loaded in place. They're sized appropriately. You can see we've got our countersunk holes and a small amount of subflush, again, to ensure that those don't protrude at all. At this point, we can bring this panel back in and now define bolts that would then be used to attach the panel to the skin. Go back to the point join command, change my subtype to fastener, select the two parts that I'm trying to connect here. Now when it comes to specifying the point, we have another option here, which is whether or not it's mated with a nut plate. In this case, I do want to use that nut plate as the tailside hardware. So now when I select, once again, here we're going to ignore any of the rivet points. And we're only going to grab the points that were used to place the nut plates in the first place, because that would be what the fastener is going to line up with. You'll notice that when I do that, it automatically assigns the nut plate as a tailside hardware. Users can't modify this, and that's because the nut plate has already been defined. That's really what drives the hardware that's going to be used at these locations. I'm going to switch my specification to use flush bolt. Let's go ahead and create that. So you can see now we've got our bolts loaded in place. We've got some countersunk holes that are placed there, so we have, again, a nice smooth surface. Of course, we've got those rivets that have already been added. And so now we've fully defined the nut plate, the rivets that will attach it to the skin, and then finally the bolts that can be removed in order to allow access inside of the panel.